Welcome, thank you for joining us. So this is What Kind, a series that the three of us are doing together. It's going to cover some tough conversations that we've been having together based on what's going on at the moment, you know, with furlough and with COVID, and things are just a bit weird at the moment and tough. So there's some tough conversations which happens naturally. The point of this session is to just introduce us, let you know where we come from, why we're involved, our backgrounds, and a bit about the other sessions themselves, so what you can expect, what kind of stuff we're going to go over, and if you've got any questions that you'd like us to address. We have got an email address specifically for that purpose, which we'll share after once this recording is shared as well. So to start us off, I'm going to hand over to the lovely Marie to introduce herself.
Thank you, Niamh. Yes, welcome everybody. It's lovely to have you on board. So just a little bit about me, if you don't know who I am or my story. I am a former fashion designer for Alexander McQueen, for Mulberry and M&S. And I had a very successful career on paper, but behind the scenes I was crumbling. I didn't know how to cope under the pressure. I didn't have the mental toughness. I didn't know anything really about resilience and what that meant and how I could kind of protect myself, and I burnt out. And you know, this was a continuous story for me throughout my career as a fashion designer, really. And also in company cultures that didn't necessarily know how to help me, and I didn't know how to help myself. So you know, I ended up having a bit of a breakdown, and sort of came out of that situation, was like, you know, I need to get myself well. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. I, you know, was feeling very lonely and isolated and anxious and scared and nervous all the time. And that's kind of when the journey of recovery started for me, and I learned how to look after myself and how to stand up for myself and how to set boundaries and really put well-being at the forefront of all the decisions that I make. And you know, and that's not easy. It's tough to do, but it's learning how to do and learning about resilience. And you know, part of the work that I do now is to help other people empower themselves to look after their own well-being. That's kind of where I come from, and that's really the empowerment that I want to give other people to do. And I think it's great, you know, to come on and do this series with you two, because, you know, one of the most sort of first and most powerful thing I did coming out of my recovery was to be honest with myself and to be honest with other people and say, look, I'm struggling, I need help. And I think that's something, you know, we're not going to get through this alone. We all need the help of other people of how to do that. And share, you know, success stories or failures or how everybody's doing. And I think that's why I wanted to get involved, to really, again, start having those honest conversations for people. You know, I think, you know, being that, you know, when you find the courage to admit that you're struggling, you can become stronger. And I think the courage to go first, which is what we're trying to do, is then helping others to follow. And that's kind of what real leadership looks like. And I think people that will be joining are, you know, either leaders within their business or leaders within their company. And, you know, having that basis of how you can help yourself, but then how you can help others. So that's it for me, really, in a nutshell of how I feel. So over to you, Niamh. I think you are going to go next.
Yeah, so for anyone that doesn't know me, I'm Niamh. I'm the marketing manager at Quickfire Digital, who are an e-commerce focused digital transformation agency. So I've been with the team for about 18 months now, and really quickly I discovered with just working with the team and the different departments that something I was really passionate about was well-being in the workplace. So it's actually how I met Marie, because we started talking about getting some process and some strategies in place for when things did occur. And so something that I focused on personally is making sure that we've got a really honest and open space. So making sure that people know if something's gone wrong or if they need some support, that who they need to go to and they can go to. And about having that confidence, something that I've sort of found myself focusing on more is with younger professionals, because we're quite a young team. And obviously I'm quite new into my career myself. So focusing on that confidence and making sure that people know how to speak up, not just that they can, but actually how to do it, which is, again, one of the main reasons I wanted to to do this with Lou and Marie, because although, you know, you can tell someone so many times, yeah, you can speak up, if you don't know how to do that, they're not going to be able to. So I think it's really, really important to share that and to start those conversations. And like Marie said, being one of the first can be really tricky, but actually just being vulnerable and opening up and saying, look, it's tough at the moment, things are really difficult, but that's okay. And you know, if you're struggling at work or in your personal life, like, you have those support systems around you. So that's what I'm really passionate about, and making sure that we can create these spaces and be honest with one another, and, you know, make sure we've got the right role models in place, which is something that's so important at the start of your career. I'm really lucky to have some amazing ones around me. Yeah, so making sure that people have confidence no matter what stage of their career they're at. I think there's often quite a lot of pressure on younger people to perform almost. You know, we've spoke about the hustle culture before. It's quite big at the moment, and it's just, there's so many unrealistic pressures on people at the moment that just are so negative in comparison to what else is going on. So that's where my real passion lies, and that's why I think this is so important, and why I'm so keen to do it for Quickfire. Yeah, Lou, do you want to introduce yourself? The lovely Lou.
Oh, thank you. Do you know what? It doesn't matter how many times I hear your stories, I'm always so moved by them and so inspired by them. So thank you, as always.
Thank you.
So for people who don't know me, my name's Lou. It's Lou Chiu, so it rhymes. Nice and easy to remember. And I am a culture and relationships coach. I set up my own practice a year ago. And that was after coming out of a career break for my own mental health. So similar story to Marie. I had more than enough burnouts to realise at, you know, at the ripe old age of 34 at the time, that that's too many, and I shouldn't be ready to retire at that age. And I'd already achieved quite a lot. I was really proud of my own journey, but I was knackered by it. And so as a recovering workaholic, one of the areas that I'm really excited about working in is the idea around workplace culture and well-being, and how it starts with you. It doesn't matter whether you are doesn't matter where you are in that company, in that institution. If you work for yourself, being able to look after yourself and being able to, you know, role model and make those decisions. And what I loved about what you said, Niamh, is this idea of speaking up, because it's about having that culture where you're heard. It's not just about going, okay, so and so can speak now, and then nothing happens to it. And so part of the practice, so a big part of my practice is around helping people work out how to bring their whole selves to their spaces, that work-life balance, the fact that we're made up of lots of different identities, and being able to celebrate and embrace difference, and knowing that we come with our own stories, and we only ever see the world from our own pair of eyes. And so when we can work together and we can piece things together, we then help one another make sense of it all. And so at the moment, the work that I'm doing lots of is around allyship, and how we celebrate that full spectrum of diversity, regardless of, you know, gender or sexual orientation, gender identity, age, as you've mentioned, Niamh, you know, people who have visible or invisible disabilities, all of that. If you're unfamiliar having those conversations, they're really tough conversations to have, because you don't want to say the wrong thing, you don't want to use the wrong term. And so, yeah, a big part of what I do is to help people have those conversations, because they're really important, and worth having. So, yeah, that's kind of what I do and what I geek out over.
Thank you. So that's us. That's who's going to be talking to you for the next 6 or 7 sessions. What we really wanted to do with this this series is, it's not going to be, this is how you sit down with your boss and these are the exact words you have to say if there's a difficult conversation. It's talking about why we feel like we can't talk up, or how, like Lou said, why that culture is in place. So it's not going to be, you know, here's a template and go have this conversation. It's going to be, here's how you can possibly approach the conversation, you know, here's how to make it a little bit easier. And like Lou was saying, you know, that's something that you're doing already, Lou, at the moment, you know, encouraging people how to start those conversations, not just having the confidence to do them. So a couple of the topics that we're going to cover, for example, is what does work look like when I go back to it? So people on furlough, I don't know if anyone watching is on furlough, but we've all got different experiences of it. I myself personally haven't gone on furlough. I've been extremely lucky, but there are members of our team that have, and, you know, in other companies that we work with. So that in itself is a really difficult thing to approach, because there's the pressure on the people that are remaining in the company, and the, you know, keeping the communication with those that we're not, that aren't working at the moment, and supporting them, not just, you know, well, they're not working, so the company forget about them. So that's not the right way to handle things at all. So yeah, we're going to be covering furlough. We're going to be covering quite a few different things. One of the things that Marie and Lou will be extremely helpful with is the confidence behind it. So I'm recognizing it within yourself. So I know this is something that Marie, in your story, you know, you said it was quite difficult to have that conversation with yourself and say, this isn't normal, I shouldn't be facing this, you know, be under this much pressure and have this level of burnout at this age. And that's something that you struggled with quite personally, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you get really good at, so when you are ambitious and energetic, and if you are a people pleaser, if you've got that bit of you hiding, then you become really caught up in what you do and you forget about who you are and your sense of being. And so the more that you kind of build this identity of like the work you, then you're neglecting the other parts of you. And so you then get into this cycle where you go, well, hang on, that's the only thing that I can see myself of as value, I'm just going to keep investing in that. And so you ignore all of the signs. So I used to have members on my team who would go, Lou, you haven't had lunch yet, or you haven't actually left your desk apart from going to meetings, like you're still here at 8-9 o'clock at night, despite the fact that part of my daily routine was making sure all of my staff were okay and making sure they were taking breaks and taking their annual leave. And so for me, it's being able to kind of spot one of those warning signs of going, if you hear anyone say, you know, do as I say, not as I do, that's one of those warning signs that we're really good at ignoring. And so, yeah, it's that awareness.
And I think from a success point of view as well, you know, I was like working really hard because I thought that's what you had to do. You know, I didn't realize that you could have both. You know, you could be successful, but you could have really good mental health and good well-being. And I think it's learning to have that balance of both, especially when you're young and you're starting out, because you want to make a difference and you want to make an impression and you want to make an impact. And you know, we forget that actually, you know, you can burn out quite easily, and actually you don't realize that you're having those kind of burnout signs. And it's then having that understanding. I think it starts with that understanding of how you work, and, you know, the boundaries that you can set yourself. Just because everybody else is working in a crazy environment doesn't mean to say that you have to do the same. And you can learn to do differently. But it is really understanding how you tick and what makes you do the things that you do. And I think then from a leader point of view, or being able to help other people, is to then have that understanding of what other people are going through as well. In the sense of, you know, and success means very different things for lots of different people. I grew up in an environment where success was having a nice house, you know, having a nice car and being able to go out and have nice meals, and, you know, this kind of almost this identity and stature, similar to what you said, Lou, where, you know, you're earning lots of money and everyone goes, oh my God, you've got this amazing life. And people, my friends would say that to me, oh, you've got this amazing life, it's so glamorous. You know, when I said I was leaving, they were just like, oh my God, what are you doing? It's insane. And I was like, yeah, but it's
better
killing
than that.
yeah, it's like, you know, traveling the world and having all these amazing experiences. And it was like, but I was miserable and I was lonely and I wasn't enjoying it. The fun had gone out of it. And I wasn't doing it for the right reasons. I was doing it because, you know, I thought that's what you needed to do to be successful. And I actually, you know, I had no purpose, and actually realized that that's not really what I wanted to do. And actually having that conversation with yourself is really hard to do. To then decide and go, do you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. And having that time, I think, to take a step back and rethink how you're living your life. And I think this time that we've had, these sort of 3-4 months now, we have had that opportunity, and some people have had that opportunity to reflect and think, do you know what, you know, I'm not happy in my job, or I want to do things differently, or, you know, had some friends that are going, do you know what, I'm not living in the city, I'm going to move to the country. You know, apparently 4 in 10 people now want to give up their life and go and live on an island. You know, it's made us all reassess what we want out of life. And I think, you know, going forward with businesses and companies and founders and leaders, you know, it's then being prepared to have those conversations, isn't it? Of someone coming to you and saying, well, look, this isn't working for me, or how can we accommodate this? You know, aside from kind of the anxieties of everything else. And I know, Niamh, we were talking in one of our sessions, you know, that we've been holding to kind of put this all together. You were talking about your own kind of experience of lockdown, and having that time to step back and have a little bit of perspective on your career.
Yeah. So we went into lockdown about 3 months ago, something like that. And I suddenly found myself because I wasn't in the office and I wasn't, you know, doing the extra hours and engaging with everyone the way I was, I sort of found myself having a lot of time to question myself and to talk to myself and talk about my priorities to myself, which sounds a bit weird, but I just often find myself doing it when I get some alone time. And I sort of was going through, okay, so where am I at now? Where do I want to go? And yeah, it's not that anything changed for me. I just had an opportunity to look at how I was not working and living, but what the situations that I was in. So I've realized that having this extra time, you know, I've discovered new things that I love doing, and I've been able to say, well, yeah, I'm really, really passionate about my job, but that's not all I am. I'm not just marketing manager, you know, I'm Niamh, which sounds so cheesy to say, but actually, like, having that realization is so powerful, and saying that, yes, I am the marketing manager and that is my job. That's my job. Like, at the end of the day, I go home and I'm Niamh. Like, who am I outside my job? And I think we spoke about this before, and I mentioned it earlier, but with this whole hustle culture, and like you said, Marie, like fame, like success looks like a nice house and lots of money in the bank, you know, there's a lot of pressure, and people often lose their identity, which I know, Lou, you talk a lot about. You know, you're not just your job, and if you move that way, if you start to see yourself as just your job, well, something like COVID happens and you go on furlough or responsibilities change, your whole identity is then changing within it, which obviously I didn't go on furlough, but my job changed, and I had to help the team and adapt, which we all did, which everyone that's still working did. So I'm really lucky that I kind of had that who am I outside of my work quite early on, so I didn't go through an existential crisis, because I'm sure people have done. But yeah, I just started noticing myself questioning the way I was talking about myself and the way I was prioritizing things as well. So that was really interesting, that happened over COVID. But yeah, I'm sure lots of people's priorities have changed. Like you said, people deciding to move or to change careers, or people deciding that actually they don't want to do the typical 9 to 5 in an office anymore. That's just not how they want to live anymore. And that focus on the work-life balance, I think after this is going to be massive, and companies are just going to have to develop with it. So we've just got a really good question from Brian that I want to ask you two. So Marie and Lou, what was the moment when you started to change your thoughts? Can you remember it? So when did you identify that actually this isn't how I should be working?
If it's okay with Marie, I'm going to jump in, because actually it's very much related to what you were saying, Niamh. So I am, what's the right word? No, I think it's the right word. I'm ashamed that the moment for me, Brian, was forced on me on several occasions. So it had gotten to the point where I had been running on reserves for a really long time, and I was running out of reserves. I had some big life changes happen, and the two, so I was signed off work on 2 occasions, and I remember the first time that it happened, and I was sent to occupational health, who tried to convince me that I was fine, and I wasn't sure that I was, but it was the first time that I was faced with that question. And so I went to the doctors, and within literally just as the doctor asked, how are things, I couldn't stop crying, and he signed me off for 2 months. And I went back to work and gave them an update, and I was escorted off the premises because I wasn't supposed to be at work. And it took me the first month to get over this loss of identity. It wasn't even to deal with what I was supposed to be dealing with. It was, I'm not allowed to be at work. I don't know who I am. And it was a whole lot of grief. Luckily, by the time the second burnout happened, again, it wasn't entirely something that was in my control, but it was a bit easier for me to go, do you know what, okay, there's some stuff that I need to work out, and it just so happened then that I decided to not go back to work, and to take the time out to really work out, like, so for people who do know me, there's a likelihood that you've either worked with me or you're one of my ex-students. And you would have known that a big thread through my career has been helping people get to the next stage of whatever it is that they wanted to do. And I never actually did that for myself. And so I took that time out to do it. And I am, so a friend of mine runs a blog called Career Gappers, and they're championing taking breaks and do the things that you want to do. And I'm so on board with that, because the time it takes for when you choose to take time off and going back into a working environment is so much faster than if you are made to take time off, or if you cannot go into work, that time off then becomes so much longer. And one day I am going to find the research to substantiate that claim, but from experiences from myself and people that I've worked with. So Brian, I have no idea when that moment was for me to proactively choose to change my thought, but it was hell of a journey to do that. So great question, thank you.
Should I jump in and ask? Because there's an Amy come up with another question, which is almost the follow on from that. And I, you know, to answer your question, what was the moment when you started to change your thoughts? I think enough was enough for me, and it's interesting. Amy's question of, once you realised that enough was enough, how did you decide what to do next? I think that's really interesting, because for so many years I wanted to change, but I didn't know how to change, and I think that can be the blocker for many people. Of, you know, I used to cry myself to sleep every night and say, right, tomorrow's going to be different, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, you know, and then, you know, I had an eating disorder, you know, and I was just completely out of control. And I think, you know, I didn't know how to put the brakes on, and I didn't know how to stop. And I think it got to the point, my breakdown was in New Zealand, in a park, in these beautiful parks, and, you know, it was a lovely, beautiful day, and everyone was punting on the river, and I literally just burst into tears and was just crying, but thinking to myself, this is crazy, I should be enjoying this amazing life that people would dream of and would love, and I felt a fraud, really, because I wasn't enjoying it. It wasn't making me happy, and I think that for me was the benchmark of, this isn't making me happy anymore. And again, that whole success thing of, you know, that's what I thought success looked like. And it was a real shock. You know, I wanted to be a fashion designer since I was 8 years old. So then be in that position where it's not working and it's not how you expected it to play out in your head is really hard. So for me, it was making that decision in my head of, you know, I can't do this. And then looking for ways to get better. You know, I couldn't afford professional help. You know, I'd come back from New Zealand, I was broke and jobless, and my marriage was crumbling and falling apart. And, you know, all I could do, I couldn't afford, you know, therapist or anything like that. So I just really started reading and started listening and looking into positive psychology and realised that I could change the way that I thought. I could rewire my brain. I didn't have to have these negative conversations with myself, and I didn't have to live my life. I had a choice. I had a choice of how I, you know, reacted and behaved and responded to situations that happened to me. And that was just such a light bulb moment and so empowering to think, do you know what, I get to choose. And I think sometimes it's really hard when you can feel quite powerless. At the moment, we can all feel quite powerless because there's so much uncertainty and nobody has all the answers and we don't know what's going to happen. And, you know, that's really scary. That's really scary stuff. And I think to be able to stay calm within that and to look after yourself within that is really hard. And I think maybe similar to you, Lou, I had that, you know, I didn't work for 9 months when I came back into the UK. And maybe having that time actually to take a step back and to recover, because I was crashing and burning in jobs, taking time off, recovering to a certain point and then throwing myself back in and not learning from anything and not realizing it was me and not realizing that I could do things differently. You know, and I wasn't changing any habits or behaviors and I wasn't changing. So I think that's when you realize enough is enough and you can't do it anymore. But you're right, Amy's question is brilliant, because where do you then go? Where do you signpost yourself? And I think that's probably where this podcast came from, and the idea that, you know, who do you talk to? You know, I didn't have anyone to talk to when I was struggling in the jobs that I was struggling in. Someone that maybe, rather than talking to somebody that you know or your family members, or, you know, somebody that, you know, can help you through it, or, you know, have been through it, something similar. And I think, you know, deciding to do next, I took it one step at a time. You know, I came back from New Zealand and I had my breakdown. I literally locked myself away and closed the door for 3 weeks and didn't get out of bed. And from that, I then had to just learn to take each day as it came. You know, make my bed, have a wash, you know, have a shower, make my breakfast and have some kind of routine and just start doing simple things. And actually taking that time to think, you know, what is it that I want? And that whole identity. I was saying, we've had a conversation about this before about, you know, when I said I was a fashion designer to people would go, oh, wow, that's amazing. But suddenly I couldn't do that. I was just Marie. And that was really hard because I didn't have that identity and I couldn't relate to that. And I didn't really know who I was. So I had to really kind of rediscover who I was. And I think that's why sometimes, for some people, this time, these last 3-4 months has really helped them to do that and reconnect with what brings them joy, what they want out of life. And I think it is having that time to do that, but then knowing then what to do. And as I say, you know, I put certain things in place and I have certain principles that I follow, and that's what I, you know, work with businesses and internal teams to help them to do that. But yeah, I would say it is then, you know, signposting, you know, when I need to change, where do I go? And then hopefully with these episodes, that's something that we can provide for people. Would you say so, guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Marie, when you were going through that, did you feel like you were saying you crashed and then you burned and then you kept going, you know, you went through it, you crashed at the end and then you just did it again? Did you feel like that was expected? Like every time you left, did you feel like you had to come back even stronger, for example? So every time you took some time off to yourself to try and get better, did you feel like, oh, why am I having to do this again? Do you know, was there that sort of like internal frustration that it kept happening rather than you just, you know, got better one day? Because that's not how it happens realistically.
No, again, you're right. You know, it's just the same. Like, you kept you're almost throwing yourself back into the lions, aren't you? Here we go again. And it's that mindset. And I just didn't know how to do anything differently. And you know, I just didn't know how to do it differently. And nobody really within, you know, the companies that I work for and were doing any other stuff of learning how to behave better. You know, fashion industry doesn't have a brilliant reputation for, you know, looking after people that are very toxic. I've fortunately had some really good managers and mentors within that time. But even still, you know, and I think it was that shame, like Lou mentioned about the shame. I was ashamed that I couldn't cope. I was really embarrassed. I didn't want people to know that I couldn't cope. But I probably didn't realise I wasn't coping. I just thought that's normal. You know, you crash and burn out. You're really busy at work, then you burn out, then you recover, then you go back again. You know, it was this constant cycle. But actually, you know, what I've learned is that, you know, we can learn to flourish in very different ways, and we, you know, human sustainability for me is really, really important, because especially from a younger age, and especially when you're in the 20s, because you think you're invincible, you think, you know, it's never going to happen to me, and, you know, you've got all this energy. And, you know, I was living in London in my 20s. You know, you worked hard and you play hard, that's what you did, and you got the last tube home. But keeping up with that, you know, definitely going into my 30s and my 40s, I just can't keep up with that pace. And I know a lot of other people that have left the fashion industry, or worked in the music industry or creative industries, that have done exactly the same thing. They've left, or they've burnt out, or they've turned to substance abuse, just to keep up with that pressure and the expectation of living this 24/7 lifestyle. And I think, you know, it, to me now, looking back, you know, it's not necessary. And I wish that we had more leaders, definitely within my industry, and other industries, where that behaviour isn't happening. You're not expected, you know, you see that with a lot of young startups. You're not, you know, expected to go in and work till midnight, drink pizza and eat beer, you know, because that's the expectation when you're a startup. You know, you're all trying to get it off. You know, 8 weeks of doing that, you've burnt out. You know, you can't sustain that. There's always going to be you can't sustain that level without there being any damage.
And I suppose watching your peers do the exact same thing, not even just role models, but the people around you. You know, you're supposed to be working to the same level as them almost, and they're doing it, so why can't I do it? Or my boss is doing it, and that's perfect. And that's something that, again, we've spoken about role models, and really identifying the right people that you want to be like. It's not just that, you know, the CEO that works 25 hours a day and gets everything done. Actually, it's the people that step back and look after themselves and look after the team. And that's so important, because I shared a story when we've been doing our chats. I shared a story. If any of you know Nathan Lomax, and I'm sure you do, and I'm sure he'll be watching and he'll love this mention.
Hope so.
Yeah. But anyone that knows him and has worked with him, his pace is so fast, and what he does is amazing, and it works really well for him. But when I first started, I found myself trying to keep up with him, and he just had to say to me, like, Niamh, I don't expect this from you. You know, you don't need to work to this pace. Just because it works for me doesn't mean it works for anyone else. And it didn't. I noticed really quickly that it just wasn't working for me. I couldn't do it. But he was able to say, look, Niamh, I can see that you're trying to do what I'm doing, but that's not necessary. You don't need to do that. There's not that expectation. And it felt like such a weight off my shoulders, because he didn't hire me to, you know, to get to work at that pace. He hired me for my skills. So yeah, it's about having role models is really, really important, but having the right ones is crucial, because if someone that isn't looking after themselves is sort of directing you in your career, you're going to start not looking after yourself as well.
Amazing. Go on, Lou, you jump in.
Just to add to that, I think what's really interesting about all of this is that, so there's something here that's around the generation gap, right? Where we tend to look for role models that are more experienced and more senior, and, you know, they tend to be the leaders of that community. And actually, I'm a massive advocate for looking for role models for behaviours that you want. Like, Niamh, you're one of my role models. I wish I had the self-awareness that you have, you know, especially back then. And so this idea that we have role models that are at certain levels, it doesn't work, because, you know, the experiences that we've shared today is around how there is a particular expectation that we've all felt across different, you know, time frames and across different stages of our career, but we've all felt it. which means that behavior is constantly there, and to not have that challenged, I think, is really difficult. And I remember when I was starting to network and get to know other businesses and other entrepreneurs, and I was saying to somebody, my kind of aspirations for my first year or two is not that aspirational, because actually I'm doing my master's alongside this. I'm also a recovering workaholic, and so I need to try and I'm trying to find this balance. And so for me right now, my pace has to be slower than maybe what other people are expecting, and definitely what I was expecting for myself. And so yeah, that idea of pace always feels like a commitment to me, because we see somebody and you know, they're working at this massive rate, and I know at least two of you who are watching right now would have seen me at a really fast pace, and hidden my anxiety and my depression really well. So I was a high functioning anxious and depressive person, and for me, that was, I've made this commitment. That's how people know me. That's what people are used to from me. I'm stuck with it now. And actually being able to go, right, I'm just, because of these other things that are going on in my life that I'm excited about, I'm just going to slow down a little bit, and I have the opportunity to. And we are in control of the pace at any time. And I think we forget that. It's this idea of choice that Marie raised earlier. We forget we get to choose, and we always get to choose to jump off if we need to. And I know that there's lots of excuses. I can guarantee there are some of you already going, but then it impacts on these people, and what about these projects that I am, you know, that I've committed to. They're all excuses for you to trap yourself into that feeling of like you don't have a choice. And if you liberate yourself from that, you might not get the outcome that you want, but at least then you've had that realistic discussion to go, okay, I can't go on annual leave that week, but I made that choice not to, rather than I can't, full stop.
I suppose there's a question there to ask yourself as well, like, you know, like Niamh, you were saying to me, like, you know, going back into situation, crashing and burning, going back in, there is that, you've set that pace and you set that precedent for yourself, so you feel like you have to keep going at that pace. So what happens if, you know, you're currently with a company at the moment that you have been doing that pace, but you want to slow down? How do you do that without you know, the impact of, you know, having on your employees, you know, if you start leaving at 5 when normally you leave at 7, you know, without them seeing a level of disengagement from you, but purely to the point actually that you've learned how to work a different way. I think that's important. You know, I attend a lot of sort of mental health events around fashion and music and creative industries, and I think there was one guy, he was a top music producer, and he would, most of the time where he would do his work and sign his deals would be in a club or in a bar, you know, having a few drinks with clients or artists that he wants to sign, or, you know, cocaine or drugs might have come into that equation. And, you know, and he was talking to his therapist, and he was saying, well, how do I stop that? You know, I'm worried that if I suddenly give up that lifestyle or give up those habits and behaviors, that I'm not going to make those deals. I'm not going to be the person that people expect me to do. And I think that's really hard. To make that shift, you know, once you've decided that actually, and goes back to Amy's question, is then what do you do next? Because if people expect you, you know, because this guy was like, you know, I either lose my business or I get clean and I have a healthy life. You know, again, you're going back to that balance of that you can't have both, but you can have both. It's how do you get that balance to achieve that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's, again, like, then the focus should go back on employers, so saying, you know, you need to recognize these traits and these patterns in your staff. You can't expect them to, just because they are doing the extra hours and committing, you know, and doing really, really good work, are they looking after themselves? Are you looking after them? You know, like you said, are they taking 3 weeks off every other year or every year because they just can't handle it? And it's about utilizing your staff, of course, and making sure that, you know, everyone's doing their jobs and the company's, you know, thriving. But on the other side is that balance. You know, you can't have, just because someone's working really, really well, that doesn't mean that they're okay, and that should be recognized. Their performance isn't the only thing you should focus on. And that's something that, yeah, again, although it's a conversation that we need to have and we need to prepare ourselves to be able to say, I'm struggling, it's then, well, what do you do if someone comes to you and says, I'm struggling? You know, it's both sides that we need to focus on. And again, it comes back to those role models within your company as well. You know, usually people sort of attach themselves to one or two key people in their team, don't they, that they go to, and it's usually, you know, a line manager or someone maybe in a different team that's a bit disconnected from your everyday work. Yeah, and, you know, identifying those people and utilizing them and making sure that you know who to go to when something like this happens, and yeah, creating that space to allow your employees to have that conversation.
I think the only other thing that I would add to that as well is that again, it's that not investing all of your identities into one place. And there are two people who are watching us right now who are responsible for helping me out of that self-destructive journey that I was on. And so I'm going to embarrass them. I'm just going to name them. So Amy, I remember I hadn't seen in ages, and we were really close when we were working together and became really great friends. But it'd been a while, and we were having a catch up, and she asked me this question of, when was the last time that you cooked a meal? And I was like, I cannot remember. And she was like, but you love cooking. And it was just that being able to check in and go, this is a part of you that you've lost touch with, that makes you feel good about yourself. And that's not something that people at work would have seen. And they wouldn't have been invested in, because they're invested in me performing and being a good manager and being approachable and being able to take on all of the crisis PR that was coming my way. But they weren't looking out for, you know, Jeanette is the other one who would make sure that I'd actually eaten a meal that day when we were running around doing events. She would ask me about my hobbies because they're really important to me, and we would geek out over things that we're studying. And it's all of those different aspects of my identity, to be able to make time and space and to nurture them. So when we're talking about warning signs before, one of my warning signs was that there was no way that I could book a social engagement within 6 months, because I was just jam-packed. And that wasn't good enough, because that I then used my professional circumstances to deliberately cut myself off from the people who would nurture and support me. And so yeah, look for the signs from the people who are built in other parts of your relationships, and the people who help make you in that entirety. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's having the people that care enough about you to challenge you, and I've definitely got people like that, that I can chat to, but will also tell me, if I'm doing something wrong, or they can recognise the signs, or give me the space to talk, or just to sit and listen. And I think that's so important, having that network of support and that connection with somebody else, and it all goes down to kind of really empathizing and understanding what people need, and people need different things at different times. Some people want a hug, some people just want a pint. It's very different for everybody, but I think surrounding yourself with people like that care enough, and not from my experience, it's without sort of killing someone with kindness. Someone can kind of allow you to behave like that, and some employees will allow you to behave like that, because again, you're productive and you're getting work done, and you kind of get spat at the end. But it's definitely having people, and even whether that's within the place that you work, having someone that looks out for you And it's brilliant, like Niamh, you were saying about Nathan, where, you know, great that you had that conversation. And if he hadn't have maybe been honest enough within himself, but you guys have obviously built that really nice, honest and trusted relationship. You know, if you hadn't, you know, you'd have continued, you'd have burnt out, you might have left and then gone and worked somewhere else. And, you know, the impact of not dealing with it early on, to stop it from kind of snowballing out of control, is powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, that then didn't become the expectation. I wasn't expected to work at that level because we'd had that really honest conversation. So yeah, it was so important. I think this has been a really good introduction to what the kind of things we're going to be going over. I'm just conscious of the time. Is there any more questions that anyone wanted to ask us about the rest of the series or wanted to go over today? Just the Q&A is open. Thank you for your lovely comment, Jeanette.
Oh. And I suppose, should we, while maybe some people are popping in some questions, did you want to talk about maybe some of the other episodes, the content for those?
Yes. Yeah, just before I will also just remind everyone that there is a an email address, which is whatkind@gmail.com. So that's a place you can submit anonymous. Obviously we'll be able to see your email address, but we will be doing an anonymous form as well if you don't want yourself attached to the questions. Obviously this is about well-being, so if there's any particular advice you want or anything that, you know, you're just not quite sure how to tackle, then that's what we'll be going over.
I'm just going to confirm the email works because we've had a beautiful email from somebody who's watching us live at the moment. I won't embarrass them by reading it out or saying who it is, but the email does work, and thank you so much for the support.
Yeah, please send in your questions. You know, if there's anything that you are struggling with, or, you know, you want to have a conversation with your employer or your boss or your boss or your team, and you're not quite sure how to have that conversation, then, you know, get in touch. You know, you're not going to be alone. I'm sure there's other people wanting to have those conversations, and, you know, and it's tough, but, you know, I think it's learning how to do that and being brave enough to do that. And I think, you know, it's that psychological safety, isn't it? You know, I think there's two things. There's one, learning how to look after your own well-being and supporting yourself, but then it's paramount to then have that support from your company culture for you to be able to be yourself and take risks and, you know, be open and honest and speak up. So it works in conjunction, doesn't it? It's finding that lovely balance.
Absolutely. So Brian wants to know when the next one is.
So the next one will be the 5th of August. So we're having a couple of weeks off to get everyone's questions in, and yeah, hear you guys' thoughts and see what everyone wants us to talk about. And then, yeah, that'll be the next one. So just briefly, some of the topics that we'll be covering. So we'll be talking about change and what the future looks like, and figuring out what your future looks like in terms of what your priorities are and how you want to go back to work and how you want to focus on making sure that either if you're returning to work or your team is returning around you, you know, what that looks like and how you tackle that. And not only, yeah, what change is going to happen, but what it actually looks like and how to get there. We're going to be talking about things like supporting your employees. So not just, you know, figuring out within yourself what you want to do, but how do you support your employees that might not quite be there yet, that might not be sure how to get to that stage yet, or how to have those conversations. We're also going to be talking about things like confidence and knowing when to have those conversations. You know, what things do you start to notice, and who do you talk to? Not just, you know I can talk about it, but who do I go to? Yeah.
Cool, brilliant. And I think oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, and we're doing a segment towards the end of the series as well, which we're all very excited about, because we're all, we're excited for all of it, but we all have a soft spot and a relationship with education. And so, yeah, towards the end of the series, we're going to be talking about the point of view from graduating students, and what it's like to be new to the workforce.
Yeah, because terrifying, I imagine, at the moment. So yeah, that'll be with a student focus, but obviously for people in education as well, you know, supporting those students and what kind of advice to give out. So, but yeah, like Lou said, that's towards the end of the series. But so this recording will be shared. Thank you so much to everyone that joined live. It's been great to have you here. So yeah, we'll share it and we'll share the details for the next sessions, and we hope to see a lot more of you there.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, it's been great.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.